is November 14th. This is Heidi Hatch with KUTV 2 News, another edition of Take Two. Doug Owens is in the House for Democrats today, and on the GOP side, Rob Axson here, the Utah GOP chair. You both have had a lot going on right now with the maps, the redistricting, a lot of drama. So thank you for making time to be here with us today, because I know your lives and days are very busy right now.
Glad to do it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there any joy in your lives right now outside of this? Rob, anything going on good?
It's actually a beautiful day. For a fall day, this
Right?
is a lovely day. You got to enjoy those moments. There's going to be fun football games. So
Unseasonably warm, and we're getting water this weekend for the lake.
I know we
Always
need
happy
that.
about
Did either of you catch the auroras this week?
No. I did. I found out about it a day later.
You were too late?
And then the next night was foggy.
I'm going to make your microphone closer there.
yeah,
The next
it
night
was
was-
kind of cool looking. I saw it while driving, so you couldn't really see it. It
Really
was just
see
like
it?
a light haze, but my
Yeah.
kids took photos, and then they showed me.
Very cool. Yeah, I missed it too because I was working in the heart of Salt Lake City, and we have too many of our own lights here to
Right.
see it. But it's been kind of a fun week to have a little nice in the middle of all of this. I want to talk about the government shutdown, which is finally over with. Did we accomplish anything with that? And then all the drama. And I feel like there's layers to the drama. You got to peel the onion on the election maps. But earlier this week, Utah Judge Diana Gibson ruled in literally the 11th hour. I think it was 11:30 to 11:45 at night on this creating the new congressional districts maps. I gave up at work. I was sticking around for it to happen. I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's not going to happen today. Got home, realized they dropped. There's been a lot of questions about why they were so late. Was it just because she was so busy trying to get the decision done, or was there some political play involved? Rob, I want to start with you because you ended up on the losing side of this. Doug, sorry, you get second choice since you're the winner chicken dinner and all this. What do you think about this late drop? What was your first reaction?
I think it was unnecessary. I can appreciate the many hours required to come up with a ruling and to do the work that needed to be done. I just think that this was one of those that was an unforced complication that further compounds a divisive issue. So I certainly wish that ruling would have come out earlier in the day. But that's relatively minor in the longer scheme of things of the underlying issue. But again, it just kind of adds to the complexity that I wish that we didn't have.
And your reaction to the map when you saw it, is it what you were expecting?
No, and specifically why is up until now, I have disagreed with her rulings, and I have disagreed with actions by the court, but ultimately that's what courts do, right? They interpret the law. They interpret what is before them within the courts, and sometimes laws will go your way and court rulings will go your way, and sometimes they don't. It's part of the process. And so I felt that they were incorrect rulings, but again, it was interpretation. This, however, takes it one step further. This is where I feel that Judge Gibson was ignoring our state constitution. Article 9, Section 1 of the state constitution lays out specifically that the legislature has the role in drafting those maps. So what's happened here is she rejected the map that was provided by the legislature. Whether people agreed with it or not, it at least went through that process. And frankly, the legislature, they went through that process under duress at her rulings and demands. So by rejecting a map that went through the legislature, she picked a map that did not. So it ignores Article 9, Section 1 of the Utah State Constitution. What's interesting is if you're looking in this hearing and this whole court case dealing with the proposition for independent redistricting commission, right? She didn't even pick maps from the commission. She picked maps from a nonprofit. So the question is, what right under our state constitution does an individual, does a nonprofit, does an NGO have to draft maps when it is very clearly a role that is given to the legislature, people who are accountable to each and every one of us as Utahns? We can hire and fire and hold accountable those folks. I have no ability to hold accountable an NGO that somehow got their map passed and implemented into law.
Okay, so your first reaction on this too. So 11th hour ruling, it made it even more dramatic coming out late at night. And a map that everyone I've spoken to in the political spectrum did not believe that this was going to be the decision that came from the courts. Were you different and thought that was the decision that was coming your way?
I thought it was exactly what the law would require, frankly. And Rob said a number of really important things I want to address. I too went to bed.
Are you
at
saying
midnight.
that as a lawyer, as a Democrat, as someone
a lawyer
who's...
and a legislator who was looking at the law, trying to follow the law, which was not to be partisan, but to have a fair, nonpartisan process. and I want to come back to that. I went to bed at midnight. I just want to address that first issue first. Looking for that decision, not seeing it, waking up at 2, as one is wont to do at my age, and get up at night several times. But and I stayed up from 2 to 3 reading the news accounts of it. I don't think there's anything nefarious, the fact that that came late in the day instead of earlier in the day. That's just a lawyer trying to get the document right up till she's running out of time. I've done that myself as a lawyer over 30 years of law practice.
So you think she was there in the office in her judicial chambers uploading it, or does someone do that for her, or how does that work?
I would absolutely think that was her there till just about midnight trying to get it, checking the punctuation in the decision. It was a 90-page decision. And our poor judges in state court, they're great. We have a great judiciary in the state. We don't have enough clerks to help them. It was a 90-page decision. She had a whole slug of big issues to deal with in a short time frame. So I think I don't think the public should see something bad there. Now, Rob said a lot of important things, and I think the heart of what he was saying we ought to talk about. That his feeling was, if I heard you right, Rob, that the judge was not properly giving regard to Article 9 in the Constitution that says the legislature is supposed to draw the boundaries for the legislature for for political districts. And it is true the Constitution says that the responsibility lies with the legislature. But here's the twist that's real important not to forget, and that is there's another clause in the Constitution that says the people can reform or alter their system of government. Proposition 4 was passed a few years ago that said we're going to put guardrails on the legislature. The legislature can still draw the maps, Prop 4 says, but they are supposed to not take into account partisan data. And the Republicans in the legislature in this last process, to their credit, tried very hard to remove partisan data from the map drawing process. I think they were let down by their expert who drew the map. And the court found, he had available partisan data, and his maps had unfair partisan impact. So she's trying to apply the law, and she would have taken the legislative map had it complied with Prop 4.
And you don't think that any partisan information was used by these outside groups who made the maps, the plaintiffs in the case? I can't imagine that this was just like drawing a line and not using partisan information.
Two things about that. Number one, the court investigated that and said so. She said that was not drawn with partisan criteria in mind. The other thing to bear in mind, Heidi, is if you look at Utah, that if you do tens of thousands of maps, you can do this on a home computer. You can program it to draw the maps applying the criteria in Prop 4, which say don't split up your municipalities, keep communities of interest together, don't look at partisan data. If you draw those maps randomly, you come up with 10,000 or even 100,000 like some of these experts were drawing. If you look at the ensemble, which is a fancy French word for a group, okay, you got a group of neutral maps drawn by a computer. Overwhelmingly, they show a district just like the one she approved, which has one district where Democrats are competitive or maybe even have the edge. Overwhelmingly, neutral maps do that. So my role as a legislator was never to go advocate for a Democratic favoring map, right? It was to say, let's have a map that does not look at party. And when you do that, you wind up with a district that kind of focuses on Salt Lake County because just the way the criteria work.
Because it draws a line right past West Jordan, so you end up losing where a lot of the growth is. So, right, South Jordan, Riverton, Harriman, Draper, Bluffdale, what else is out in that area, all kind of get cut out of the county, right?
Well, you have to take some voters out of Salt Lake County because it's too big for one district. So Salt Lake County has to be split. But so that's the gist of what happened here. She's trying to say to the legislature, if you comply with the law, I will take your map. And she said, no, you didn't do that. So now I got this other map. Was that ideal? No. She's trying to follow the law the best she can, which is what courts do.
So a couple of things here. What's interesting, if I remember right, in the hearings when Map C was adopted by the legislature, you offered one or two alternatives.
We offered a map.
So what's interesting here is I would have preferred from a point of process, adopt the map that came from the legislature, even if it had not been voted upon, there would have been more logical reasoning in my mind that they would have gone to the map presented by Representative Owens here and others in his caucus as at least an offering that was put forward versus something that came from an NGO. The other piece that I think is important that was referenced, and I can appreciate the need for the judge who has already relied on the state Supreme Court ruling last year and her own ruling to look to this authority of the people to reform their government that was laid out in Article 6, Section 2 of the state constitution.
Talk nerdy to me.
Right? So Article 6, Section 2 lays out the power of the initiative process. So the hearing and process and rulings from last year said, yes, look at that. That is an authority that the people have in their state constitution. But I'm not one who believes that a judge should be able to ignore any part of the Constitution. So I can appreciate her need or desire to comply with the new understanding of what Article 6, Section 2 is, but I don't believe in any way, shape, or form that absolves her of the right and obligation to adhere to Article 9, Section 1 of the state Constitution. A couple of other things that I think is very important. One of the desires of the Better Boundaries initiative process was to create competitive maps. That is one of their stated goals. It's been one of the things that they have harped on for 7 years. This map is in no way, shape, or form competitive for any of the parties. Map C that was adopted by the
There were
legislature
two in there that
had
were
two competitive maps. So you had an option for two competitive maps here in the state of Utah, which would have brought more voters in from both sides of the political divide, including third parties or non-affiliated voters who are not affiliated with a specific political party. That, at least you could say, was a competitive situation, which was one of the stated goals of this entire effort. In adopting this map, you have 4 districts, 3 that are in no way, shape, or form competitive for Democrats, and 1 that is in no way, shape, or form competitive for Republicans.
Yeah, we're looking at a D plus 14 were the numbers I was looking at. I've seen some numbers kind of ish up and down from that, but it's definitely, I mean,
It's
a solid blue.
D14 to D23, depending on how you look at some
If you're
of that
looking
data.
at local or national, yeah.
I think it's overly simple to say the legislature's map created 2 competitive districts. I think the numbers I saw were something like one was R plus 11, an 11-point Republican advantage. The other one was R plus 15. Those are not.
2 to 6 is the numbers that I have. One was an R2 to 6, depending on how you look at it, and the other one was an R7 to 11, depending on how you look at it.
Well, so probably one more
Those
competitive.
are interesting. So, but again, that's me as a politician, right? Me as a legislator was saying, we got to look at Prop 4, draw a map without regard to partisan criteria, and then ask, after you draw it, does it unduly or unfairly impact one party? And the map the legislature passed did not do those things. That's what the judge found. I was trying to say that during the hearing process a month ago, that the expert was doing stuff that we thought was unfair to one party.
You were in on those meetings. Do you feel like both sides had their heart in it in wanting to make sure that there was fair maps?
Yes, I absolutely credit my Republican colleagues with having pure intentions about following the law. I think they were let down by the expert that was drawing the maps for them.
One of the interesting things that comes out of this, Better Boundaries, Congressman Blake Moore was part of that when it started years ago. He's probably going to end up on the losing end of the stick here. I don't know how they're going to decide who's running for what congressional races, but if he's in District 1 and runs for District 1 again, he's got a solid loss probably coming his way.
I'm very interested to hear
Keep in mind,
Rob's.
District 1, it effectively has changed. The labels no longer really
so the
matter.
question is, where are you going to run?
If Utahns think of District 1, they're usually in
Northern
their mind
Utah.
thinking of Northern Utah.
Yeah.
So that, I believe, is now called District 2.
Yeah.
And so there's no legal requirement to live within the district. I know that Congressman Moore lives here in the Salt Lake Valley, but he has represented Northern Utah. I assume that he may look at that. But ultimately, they'll need to, as incumbents, look at what they're doing, and others will look at where they want to run. This whole process is one that I think we've, in an attempt to solve things for all parties, right? Whether you're on the political left, political right, better boundaries, opposed to better boundaries, a lot of the stated goals, even when they've been in opposition, nobody's landed in a good spot. You either believed in competitive maps, but now you suddenly don't. You either believe in the Constitution, or now you suddenly don't. You either believe that the legislature has a role and is accountable to us, or suddenly you don't. This whole process has led us into a far more contentious outcome than we should have ever been as a state. And I think it's unfortunate that this has occurred. And in my opinion, it lays out some of the justification of why we should be so concerned about unfettered initiative processes that allow for folks to have good ideas and good intentions, but we rob ourselves of the true kind of special sauce of the American system of government, where we have this collaborative back and forth among elected officials, where they bring their different ideas and engage in that process and are accountable to us. One example for that, and that I'll point out to, and I think that the representative brought up a great point of laying out all of these different examples or tests to see what these maps could have looked like. And you do 10,000, a certain percentage of them start to look the same way, right? But I think there's an important piece for Utah that our legislature has articulated for decades, and that is a desire for what is referred to oftentimes as this pizza slice approach, rather than the donut hole approach. And I think that's a legitimate thing for the legislature to have concern over for a state like Utah, where we only have 4 members of the House of Representatives that come from our state, yet we have issues that are very unique to rural Utah, for example. And if those issues and those challenges are not vocalized for and fought for in Congress, it is to our state's detriment. Even those of us that live right here on the Wasatch Front, even the issues that are most front of mind for a lot of the folks that live in Salt Lake County, for example, are issues that are solved in rural Utah. For example, school funding, water, housing affordability, general affordability of products and goods and food and groceries. These are issues that the big solution or the big crux of those are in rural Utah. So I think it's to the disadvantage of those of us that live in Salt Lake County if we have a member of Congress who doesn't have themselves grounded in the needs of both the urban and rural issues of the state.
I'm worried about whoever has the district where you have to drive 75% of the state when you're home, because that's a lot of ground to cover too. So that's kind of an interesting problem. Do you see that as an issue?
Sure. Well, I mean, yeah, they'll have to probably learn how to fly or something to make it easier. Right. I mean, that's a problem. But I want to hit on one of the ideas Rob was throwing out there, which is the unfettered initiative process. This is not an unfettered initiative process. This initiative process has a lot of fetters. It's very hard to run an initiative. It's very expensive. You got to gather 140,000.
Rob might be learning that soon.
And I am very familiar with that. To be clear, I don't mean that process. There definitely are hoops that is a very complex issue. I'm dealing with that as Heidi mentioned. What I'm talking about is I think our country is at its best and our system of government is at its best when the weeds and the minutia have the opportunity for folks like you who have been elected by your constituents to dive into.
Totally.
And I want more of that.
Totally. We are a Republican democracy rather than a pure democracy. And that's a good thing, Rob. Yep. I agree with that you want thoughtful representatives who can occasionally throw off their party labels to work together for good policy for everybody. That's the ideal. But let's go back and look at what happened. You had an initiative process that's only worked 7 times in the whole history of Utah, and it's a very difficult process. And they said, we just want some guardrails on the legislature. Stop taking account of party. The party had done that pizza slice approach, which at one level it's easy to say, oh, that means you get a mix of urban and rural. But it also meant that all the Democrats were split up in 4 districts. Now, the Republican Party registration in the state's only a little over 50%. It might be 51% by some counts, a little under that by the other counts. There are a lot of Democrats in the state. There's a lot of independents who would like a chance to be represented. Now we're talking politics rather than the Prop 4 process. But I think there's reasons to have competitive districts or Democratic-leaning districts that. I think the open competition of ideas is healthy. I would much rather have a lot of competitive districts in our state and in our country than districts that are clearly favor one party. I think that's a healthy way to go. There's reforms in place to try to get us that direction. But in the meantime, we're stuck with what we had, which was a legislative process that split up Democrats. You may think it didn't have a nefarious intent, but it had a very thoroughgoing impact, which was to prevent a Democrat ever winning a race. Okay, so the Prop 4 said, well, let's just take party out of it, because you don't seem to be able to do that. We'll take it out for you, and let's put that guardrail on the legislature. And I think the legislature tried. I really do. I tip my hat to some really solid, well-intentioned Republican colleagues. But I think, again, they were let down by the expert. And that's what the court found, that had been a partisan exercise.
So you don't feel like the judge stripped you as a legislator of part of your power and your ability?
No, I don't. I think she was trying to craft the right remedy for the people of Utah, who had exercised with great difficulty and care an initiative process a few years ago.
So, Rob, I know that you as the Utah GOP chair are different than the leaders who are elected. They probably are doing different things than what you are. What are you hearing about a possible appeal? Because when I spoke to Jason Perry at the Hinckley Institute earlier this week, he was foreseeing a turbocharged race to the courts where this was not the end of it. It would be fought out in the courts and it would maybe rejigger the maths, and this is not the end of it. But we have not seen that turbo race. It's been very quiet, quieter than most people expected. I'm hearing some rumblings that possibly that late filing on almost midnight of the day that the lieutenant governor gave the judge may make it so Republicans cannot appeal, something that Governor Cox said that he backed.
I don't want to get into the appeal process too much, simply because that's not my issue to talk about. They being the legislature and the Republican majority there will need to determine what they desire to do.
Your friends aren't telling you what they're up to?
I mean, what I do know, it's not my news to share.
Yeah.
So what I want to focus on, though, is this underlying issue. This issue that, again, I think all of us can agree has played out more contentiously than it needed to be. And the long-term effects of us not getting this right and figuring out where the right place to be is going to be to our long-term detriment. I'll point out where this all began. And it was mentioned that only 7 times that an initiative process was successful. Well, 3 of them were in 2018. And it was in the context of 2018 where you had 3 things that went forward.
Is that when we gave the legislature power to call themselves into session?
That one was more tied, if I remember right, to filling a vacancy in Congress. I think that was following the resignation of Jason Chaffetz.
One was medical marijuana. Was that the
medical marijuana, Medicaid expansion.
That got the voters out.
And this. So you had a lot of voters that were turned out for a host of reasons. And I think we've talked about this on your show before, Heidi, but $2.8 million were spent promoting the passage of Proposition 4. $0 were spent in opposition. Now, shame on Utah and those that, like myself, believe that this was the wrong approach for not having worked harder then to prevent this. But with a 2.8 million to 0 disparity, this was still a 50.34% of the vote that ultimately led to its passage. So this was not an overwhelming opinion of the people of Utah. And in fact, it only passed in 4 counties: Salt Lake County, Summit County, Carbon County, and Grand County. In every other county, Proposition 4 was rejected. So in light of that, again, and this is part of what is motivating what we're doing with our initiative process right now, is to give this back to the people of Utah to ask the question again and see, is this really what you signed up for back in 2018? One other thing that I'll share on that, in 2018, when it was on the ballot, the Independent Redistricting Commission was referred to as a recommending body. Well, no fault to the petitioners then or the people who supported it, but the courts have turned it from a recommending body into a binding body. I think that with that change in mind and the close nature of that vote, again, the people of Utah need to ask themselves and be offered the opportunity to answer the question, is this what we signed up for?
I want to mention a couple things. I hope that people don't think that a law isn't a law just because it didn't pass by more votes than it passed. It passed, and the world is run by the people who show up. So Proposition 4 is the law of the land.
Absolutely.
And the process,
just like President Trump's still your president, even if you thought he didn't win by enough.
That is correct. Yeah. And the idea that that we have stripped the legislature of the map drawing authority is not correct. Prop 4 says they can draw the map. They can take independent maps or they can draw their own, but they have to do it in a nonpartisan way. That's all it says, Prop 4.
But did the judge, I guess, go against what the Constitution is in that she picked something that the legislature didn't have a hand in?
Absolutely, she did.
the legislature had a hand. She said, you can draw a map that complies with Prop 4. And she said, this doesn't comply with Prop 4. What's she supposed to do? Keep an illegal map in place?
I think
she's
there's
trying
remedies,
to craft.
though.
What part
judges,
wasn't good about it? Because she have gone back to the legislature, though, and said, you did 10 things, one of them's wrong, can you refix this?
Because the lieutenant governor said she needed, in order to administer the election, which is her job, and she does a great job at it, she said, I got to have a map by November 10, okay? And she got a map from the court on November 10. And so that's the map. She needs a time to roll it out. It's a complicated thing to get the maps and the districts done properly and have an election on them. So the judge is doing the best she can. She gave the legislature ample opportunity. It was exercised. She found specific reasons that it did not comply with Prop 4. It was drawn with partisan information, and it had undue partisan impact. I want to touch on one other thought, which was the late in the day thing came up again. Did that prejudice the ability of the state to appeal? Mm-hmm. It didn't. We all knew that decision was going to come on the day. The fact that it came late in the day instead of early in the day does not impact somebody's ability to appeal. You have a set number of days to appeal. It's a 1-paragraph filing.
You're a lawyer, so can they still appeal?
Yes.
How does that work?
As my kids know, when you're a lawyer, you lose 50% of your personality points. So, yeah, I have a law license, and I have not been afraid to use it at times, sadly. But that's an easy deal. The judge, by filing the decision late in the day, did not hurt anybody's ability to appeal. It'll be interesting to see how that goes.
And Rob, you've been holding meetings over the last 2 weeks across the state talking about the initiative process again.
Yep.
I would just guess here that you were probably waiting to see if appeals would go on or if it's something you're going to do. Have you decided to go forward with this and start funding the signatures? Tell me where you're at after these meetings.
Yes, so those meetings were both necessary from the perspective of engaging with Utahns, so that I think is beneficial, and it's one of the reasons that we did 14 meetings instead of 7 meetings, as required by statute. But the other piece is required. Like I said, in statute, you have to conduct 7 meetings in 7 different regions of the state. And anytime you're putting forward an initiative, you put it before the people to get those comments, and then you proceed to the next stage. The next stage is to then finalize your submission or application, so to speak, with the LG's office, who then grants approval based off of a number of criteria, and then you can proceed with signature gathering. So we have done that process. It has been approved, and signatures are being gathered and have already been gathered and will continue to be gathered.
When's your deadline to get them done?
Deadline is February 15th, and to what Representative Owens said, even if things pass with very small margins, they still are the law. I wholeheartedly agree. I do think that the question is not clearly answered yet by the people of Utah, but the law is what the law is, and that's why we're going through this process. Is we are going through the very process that brought us Proposition 4 to then consider its repeal. And it's going through the legal process to adjust the law in accordance now with the new understanding and interpretation of the Constitution as laid out by the Supreme Court here in Utah last year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
You got to call me Doug, Rob, otherwise I'm going to have to call you Chairman.
Oh, yeah. Doug it is.
I wanted to ask, we've talked a little bit about this, but one of the questions I've seen people asking online is, like, who's allowed to gerrymander? And I think I remember when the initial maps came up, I heard a news conference with the governor, and he admitted, he said, yes, this map, whatever the last one was gerrymandered, but it's the ability of the legislators to choose to do that. I would ask if we've ended up with a gerrymandered map. I feel like you think that it's fair, but I think that a lot of people think that it's been gerrymandered now, but in the opposite direction by a judge. Do you believe that's happened, or you really do think that there was like...
No, I don't, Heidi, and here's why. Because gerrymandering is usually understood to draw those boundaries as drawing those boundaries in a way to harm the party out of power that doesn't have the majority that's drawing the boundaries. And the judge, Prop 4 says you can't draw the map with that intention. You've got to do it in a neutral manner. And there's a bunch of different tests and data sets to look at to see, have you drawn it with regard to that party, those party affiliations, okay? So we were coming out of a situation where we had the pizza slices, which I can understand Chairman Rob's theory.
So he can be Rob with a title.
You may want a whole cross section, okay? But what it did is it distributed the Democrats evenly among all 4 districts, and there was no ability to win an election. And that has an undue partisan impact. So what you do is you get a computer to draw them, and you say, don't look at party, look at municipal boundaries, look at county boundaries, look at these communities of interest, say like an Indian reservation, Native American reservation or whatnot. You can do all these different things you can program into a computer, and when you do that 10,000 times or 100,000 times, you get a district like what she got. So it is a Democratic leaning area. You know, that's weird in Utah. It's an unexpected thing because it's unexpected in Utah. But the reality is when you do it neutrally, that's what you get.
I do think that and obviously I disagree here respectfully. I do believe that whatever attempt to avoid gerrymandering and to throw gerrymandering out with the belief that had happened before, it was only accomplished by doubling down in ways that we haven't seen in Utah to gerrymander an outcome that you could not earn politically otherwise. And in an attempt to not, divide out the Democrat base, that I can understand that being a desire. You can't tell me that pretty much rounding them all up into one district is not manipulating an outcome for an outcome's sake. And when you talk about these communities of interest, I'll point an example out that was raised for me. I grew up in Salt Lake County and then in Alpine, down in Utah County. Alpine and Highland are in 2 different congressional districts. These folks all go to the same schools. They share a police department and a fire department. These communities, that's a community of interest that was divided. And yet the urgency to keep Rose Park and Sugar House, 2 divergent parts of Salt Lake County, into one unified space because they are a community of interest as one city, just doesn't make sense to me. Those are different schools, different communities, different churches, different grocery stores that you're going to, not the case in these other communities. So it just seems like with this map, there was a willingness to not consider the expected expectations of holding communities together if it was in rural Utah, while claiming that was paramount to be done right here in downtown Salt Lake so as to ensure, again, getting the highest majority of Democrats into one district.
There's certainly a lot that goes into this. As you're both talking, I think most people at home don't realize how much goes into it, and there's thoughts about, splitting those communities and how you do that properly. So obviously a lot that goes into it. I do want to mention that there have been a lot of Democrats. Jim DeBackus pushing, I think, was the first in his party to say, hey, register as Republicans, maybe, figure out who you'd like to be, maybe your more centrist choice. Democrats still have an open primary. So does that mean Republicans can come join you and find the most centrist person that they would like in, I guess, the primaries that are going to be happening?
It does indeed mean that, Heidi.
Woo.
And they're very welcome to come over and do that. Here's the thing, when the country was founded, the early founders did not want a British-style party system, and we rapidly got it, notwithstanding that the Constitution doesn't make provision for it, notwithstanding that the founders thought it would be a bad idea. We got it because it's a system for grouping interest to get people elected. And what it shouldn't be, but what it's become beyond that, is a system for trashing the other side on a permanent basis, instead of realizing vast majority of people in the country and in our state want the parties to work together for the betterment of the situation for all of us. And there's a lot of good people doing that on Capitol Hill here in Utah. I'm including specifically my Republican friends. But nationally, we see this divisive media, a lot of money being made by trouncing, just dumping on the other side. So we get people that aren't willing to work together, and the election cycle never ends. And it's a sad deal. Rob was alluding a minute ago to this, why were certain interests kept together, certain communities. And I think the judge tried to look at that. She tried to look at that. And if you, like I say, if you draw this ensemble, this group of maps, a computer does tens of thousands of maps, and you pick the one right in the middle, you get one just like we got. That's what you get. Something
interesting here, and the first part of your remarks, I want to echo and commend. I agree that political parties have a purpose, and they can be a massive force for good, but they can also be a massive force for detriment and division and contention. And we should find good policies and good principles in the people that advocate for those and work together regardless of political labels. What's interesting, and I agree, Judge Gibson, I don't know her personally, I've never met her. I assume that she was trying her best with what she was looking at. Now, I think she took in things that as a judge you shouldn't be taking in and probably wanted certain outcomes. That's my personal opinion. But the point that you made, she probably tried to look at all of these various things in communities of interest and did do her best. But that's the point of why the legislature should be doing this, because I guarantee that had this map gone through the normal process, the representatives who represent the example I brought up of Alpine and Highland could have said, whoa, this is very problematic. You are literally dividing a community that should have unified voice in its congressional district. That's the power of that representative democracy that occurs when you have elected officials that can go in and dive into the interests of representing their constituents. The people of Utah lost out on that opportunity here, and one judge, we can't expect her to be an expert in every community. None of us are. Nobody could be that. But that, again, is the power of elected representatives.
Well, that was not what her mission was to say, did this map get drawn with partisan intention or does it have undue partisan impact, okay? That's what she did. She didn't decide whether one community should stick with another. She decided, was there a fair process that went into the forming of the map? And let's not forget, she was appointed by a Republican governor and
Herbert,
confirmed by a overwhelmingly Republican Senate. This is a judge who's just trying to follow the law.
So since that issue was brought up, this is interestingly another quote-unquote independent committee and commission, and it's the Independent Nominating Commission for our state judiciary. In the 1970s, there was a change to our process that came through, and it established an independent nominating commission. That nominating commission until 3 years ago was dominated by the Utah Bar Association and through actions of the state legislature, and you've been up there, so you would have seen this when it went through that process. It was determined to take that one entity out of a controlling interest in the nominating commission. But what happens is the governor, regardless of if they were Republicans or Democrats, would have happened during Jim Matheson's time in the 80s, and then Republicans since then. They would have received a list of candidates that came through that commission. They can't pick anybody that is outside of the names that are forwarded to them. So I think there are probably some of these instances where the governor is picking the least offensive of the options that are given to them, or the best option of those individuals, but it might not be the person that Governor Herbert or Governor Cox or Governor Leavitt and Huntsman before that would have picked if they were not forced to have the names given to them by a commission.
Speaking of the bar, they actually came out against a call that came out probably minutes after the ruling came from the judge. But Rep. Matt MacPherson from West Valley City announced that he would draft a bill to impeach the judge, saying that she used a gross abuse of power, violating the separation of powers. Do you foresee that going forward and something that you'll be taking part in?
I certainly would argue against a bill like that. I hope he doesn't run it. I think that's not an abuse of power. The judge, it's really not a good look when the legislature, the most powerful branch of government, because it holds the purse strings, it's not a good look when they dump on a judge for trying to follow the law. I mean, Judge Gibson had no choice. She didn't ask to hear the case. She had to decide the questions put to her. I've skimmed the 90-page decision. I can see that she's trying to do it fairly. And I think it's just terrible to punch down like that as a legislature. And the right answer is, let's appeal it. If you don't like it, appeal it. You don't threaten and bully like that.
Impeachments, we hear threats of them a lot on a national level now. Every president faces it, Trump probably more than anything. And I think people are at some point are like, okay, stop, let them do their job. Should the same thing happen here with this judge where we stop yelling impeachment, or are there real reasons to look at this?
So I can understand the emotion of it and the reason it would be thrown out as one of the options that are there, because there is this need to protect the separation of powers and checks and balances that exist both on our national structure and system of government as well as what we have here in Utah. And again, I've said it a couple of times, but there is a strong belief by many, myself included, and I think Representative MacPherson, that while this judge maybe didn't choose this case to be on their docket, this judge did choose in her ruling and finding to ignore Article 9 of the Constitution of Utah. And so, yes, and specifically, it's not just ignoring a constitutional provision, which would be inappropriate in and of itself, but it also, in so doing, you took away authority and power from the legislature. So having the legislature then be emotionally concerned and legitimately concerned and justifiably concerned as to that encroachment on their authority. What are some elements of power that they have to push back against the judiciary? And impeachment is one of those powers. So that's something that the legislature is going to have to look at. You have quite a few calls for that coming from people all across the state of Utah, and there is concern. And I think whether we intended to ignore the Constitution or not, and whether the intentions were actually quite pure in trying to comply with other provisions of law, that can be noted, but it doesn't mean you get away with allowing a disregard for the Constitution to go unresponded to.
But see, I think it's wrong to say she ignored that provision of the Constitution. It's all over her decision. It's all over the Supreme Court decision that told her what to do, okay? She did not ignore it. She's trying to interpret one clause that says the legislature draws the districts and another one that said the people can reform their system of government. And the Supreme Court told the district court judge, the law is that the legislature must follow Prop 4. And she said, I'll take your map, legislature, if it follows Prop 4. And then she's got all this evidence that said they didn't follow Prop 4. That expert, I feel like, let down the Republicans.
I know we're going in circles on this, and you know, Doug and I are just going to disagree, and we're not going to solve this. But I do think it's important for all of us when we run into something with really good intentions, and you're trying to do the best that you could. If you are ignoring a piece out of necessity, in the opinion of Doug, or in my opinion, out of you've ignored it out of a decision that you made. Maybe that's the time to pause and to dive a little bit deeper. Figure out how you could do a ruling that doesn't require you to abide by a new interpretation of the initiative power of the people that was laid out last year by the state Supreme Court. That complying with that means you're ignoring the other part of the Constitution. Figure out a way to do both. Figure out a way that would allow you to proceed. Again, I don't think this would have been the best thing, but it's certainly better than what she did. Pull up Doug's map. Call Doug on the night of the 9th and say, hey, send me your map. I have sincere objections to map C that was adopted by the legislature, but yours at least was considered in committee, so I'm going to take your map. In not doing that, in not even trying to do that, and going to an unelected NGO, I just find it to be incredibly inappropriate.
What was your map? What was your D+ on yours?
I don't know.
I don't know.
We didn't look.
You didn't look at that.
It without
We'd have to do the math.
Partisan impact, actually.
I want to talk the fun stuff now. We all knew that former Congressman Ben McAdams was getting the race. If you didn't, I don't know where you're living, under some rock or something. He announced, but State Senator Kathleen Riebe actually beat him to the punch. I didn't even realize that. I was working knowing that Ben McAdams was going to announce Thursday morning, writing up some stuff the night before, just knowing, that he was going to announce, having it ready for the next day, not knowing that Senator Riebe had announced herself. So if I'm giving her any advice, you need to send out better press releases or have your people call so that Ben McAdams doesn't usurp all of your headlines. So they're both in the race. The question is this going to be a really crowded race? Are others who are probably far more left, like Senator Nate Blouin, going to get into race? Is Mr. Owens going to get into the race? Do you have any announcements you'd like to give us today?
I don't. I'm not getting in the race. I like.
You should do it. Opportunities like this only come once in a while, and
right?
usually after court rulings. So now's your time.
No, I am not getting in the race. And Ben is a prohibitive favorite. He's got guts. He's proven public servant, and I'm all for Ben. And I think the other, there may be others who get in. I like those other two folks in there, but.
Is Ben too blue dog Democrat, and you need someone? You've got a heavily blue district now. Are they going to demand maybe someone a lot further to the left then?
I don't.
Do you have any socialists you can offer us?
I guarantee they do.
I'm happy for a Utah Democrat to get in there, and the party will play that process out.
Well, I want to point out something kind of interesting. So Ben McAdams' son and my son used to be on the same baseball team.
Cute.
Senator Riebe is my state senator, and Senator Blouin likes to troll me on Twitter. So I think I'm the nexus. So what other Democrats do I know that are going to be?
Are you friends with Jenny Wilson or maybe the Salt Lake City mayor? Are either of them going to ditch their mayorships and go for the race?
Well, I think any Democrat right now, if these are the maps that stand, that has a tie to Salt Lake City and to Salt Lake County, of course you're going to be looking at this. And if you think that you have a voice to and a message to be shared for Utah and for the people that you represent, you'll consider it. Being the mayor of the largest city in Utah or the county mayor of the largest county in Utah are certainly strong platforms from which to run a race.
All right. I want to talk nationally because it's been a stressful week for our weeks, more than a month for a lot of Utah families who work in the federal government who are at home, a lot of families who are waiting for their SNAP benefits. We have a decision. It's been signed by the president now. The government is functioning again. Democrats were really the holdup the way I see it. There's blame on both sides of the aisle, but they were holding it up because they really wanted to make sure that some of these the ACA healthcare subsidies that were put in place during the pandemic would go through again. Part of the deal to get the government open is that there will actually be a vote on the issue, but I don't know that a lot of people are going to change minds. Did Democrats gain anything out of this shutdown as you see it, or are we back to square one and we just shut the government down for 6 weeks?
I don't think anybody gained anything out of it. We lost it's a morale deflator. It makes us look like a banana republic. I think it's a bad idea to shut down the government. I don't like either side. Neither side was moving. It wasn't just the Democrats. It was the Democrats asking for something. They needed Democratic votes. There should have been a negotiation. Instead, they were met with a stone wall, and finally they just...
Is that the time to negotiate when the government shut down, though? When you look at precedent years ago, you wouldn't debate big issues like that during a government shutdown. You would do it other times. Was it the approapproactive time to discuss it?
It was the only time. Because
hostage negotiations are needed sometimes?
Well, it's an opportunity to try to get, when your votes matter more in the shutdown context, it's a time when you get some leverage to try to stand up for what you believe. The fact is the Democrats saw enough pain in the country that they were willing to change their position. The Republicans were not willing to change their position. I think they should have been locked in the Capitol without paychecks and without food and water until they came to a deal. Instead of imposing the pain outside the Capitol, we should make them feel it in the Capitol, because that's what happens is these situations, there's enough pain felt that finally people respond and move. I think just localize the pain where it ought to be felt.
Something that's kind of interesting on this.
Republicans are being blamed the most, though, when you look at polls.
Which is incredibly unfair in this situation. There's been times where Republicans maybe were more at fault for causing a shutdown. This was not that case, especially when you consider that the Democrats objected to the very funding that they put into place during the Biden administration. So they are being offered literally the same deal that they had crafted before. They were given everything that they had wanted before. And to Doug's point, the better time to negotiate is when you're back in session and engaged in that process. Take the deal that was a very favorable deal where it was literally what you had negotiated, and let's get back about the country's work. The challenge is shutdowns have become a political tool, and they've become something that have become part of the process, as well as other things that are very inside baseball. But there's a thing called parliamentarily called filling the tree in the U.S. Senate, and it's based off of what type of motion that you consider. In all of history, it had only been done a handful of times, beginning with Harry Reid and then continuing on with even Republican majority leaders in the U.S. Senate. You have this filling of the tree that happens a ridiculous amount of times, from a small handful over history to literally hundreds and hundreds of times that it's occurred. What happens is it then controls the debate, that the majority leader, in consultation with the minority leader, kind of control the dialogue. It freezes out the other 98 senators. There's not dialogue, there's not debate. So of course, if we now have members of Congress who have never experienced something outside of that dialogue-oriented space, and now it's into this space of polarizing and not talking and just going through what your party leaders are saying, they don't know how to negotiate anymore to the same degree.
They remember the days of Senator Hatch and Kennedy where they were on opposite sides and they would sit down and hash out deals. That just doesn't seem to happen a lot these days.
Yeah, it's quite unfortunate, and the biggest piece is everything is tied around the power of the purse, right? And so you have to pass these funding bills. So much of the contention that then leads into these like take it or leave it bills that either shut down the government or become omnibus bills that do 1,000 things they never should have been doing. You only have that as the natural outcome when you're not passing the individual. I think there's 11 different funding bills that should naturally go through Congress. That's the more appropriate place because the relevant committee members can really dive deep, left and right, and really come to consensus and find compromise and give and take, and you've come up with a bill that makes sense, that's a compromise. When you've skipped that process, it then is just in the public eye, in front of all the cameras, and it's either take it or leave it. You're either on my team or you're not on my team. You're either going the party line or you're not going the party line. It's not the right way to govern, and I really would invite and hope that our legislators in Congress of both parties will approach things different and expect their leadership to engage in the regular order of process and debate.
Rob, can I ask Rob a question? Why,
for it.
Why have we lost that, Rob? Because I grew up in a time in politics when we had that. What's different now?
Great question. I wish I had the answer. What's interesting, so I worked in Congress for 13 years. The first 3.5 years that I worked in Congress, I was in D.C. And I'll tell you from when I first went in and started working in Senator Lee's office, and I had been an intern in Congressman Bishop's office a couple of years before that, there was already a little bit of a difference. And I think that at the time it was caused by the populist movement that led to Occupy Wall Street on the left, Tea Party on the right. So you had this kind of populist fervor coming from outside forces that started to break up that ability of dialogue and debate. And then it's this inverse incentive. If you can avoid hard votes, it's easier to get elected. And if you can hide hard votes into a big, giant take it or leave it, there's enough there that you can say, I had to vote for it because it's SNAP funding. I had to vote for it because it's funding our air traffic controllers and military. And then you get to hide away from the really bad things in that bill. So there's this inverse incentive if you're just looking at incumbency and running for re-election that you can hide your difficult votes from the voters and just take credit for the good stuff and blame the bad stuff on, sorry, that's just how DC works. We need to have courage in D.C. from both parties to realize, take the hard votes, have the hard debates, and really do the work of the people.
Which is why I think we haven't solved some of the basic issues that both sides, I think, for decades have agreed that immigration and other DACA recipients all had to get solved. But there's always a hard vote that you don't want to do, which is frustrating. And I think a lot of this goes back to social media, too. You don't want to blame everything on social media, but I feel like everyone wants to use it, like these echo chambers or your chance to spin. I wanted to poke my eyes out during the shutdown with the right and the left, like walking through empty halls and nobody else is here and no one will talk to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you were a terrible actor. Please make this stop. All of you, stop making videos for Snapchat or Twitter or whatever else you're doing. I'm like, just go talk to your other senators and work out a deal. So sometimes I feel it's just, ugh.
There is a better way, and Utah has known it. 30 years ago, people don't know half the drinking water in Salt Lake and Utah counties comes from the Central Utah Water Project, which got over $1 billion of federal money. That's billion with a B. And that's 30 years ago when $1 billion was a lot of money.
It still is a lot of money, but not as much, yeah.
It was due to a bipartisan friendship between a Democrat in the House, Wayne Owens, who's a relation of mine, and it was Jake Garn. They had actually run against each other in a race, but they were still friends.
So it took an astronaut and an Owens.
It took a Democrat in a Democratic-controlled House and a Republican in a Republican-controlled Senate to get that funding for Utah. So bipartisanship works for Utah. We could set the example.
I would like to get back to that someday. I don't know if it's even possible with the road we're down. I believe there's always a chance to turn and change.
Here's the one silver lining, just so you know. More of the funding bills that I talked about, those 11 different bills, they've actually passed more the last year at this stage than has happened of late over the last decade or 2 decades. So I think they're going in the right direction. We just need to encourage more of that and give enough latitude to our elected officials to debate more, take more votes, so that we then can get to the right consensus of what's good for the people of Utah and the people of this country.
Yeah, and I hope actual work gets done because we're moving into Thanksgiving, which I can't believe is around the corner, 13 days away. And we've got Hanukkah and Christmas and New Year's, and then we've got another deadline coming up on the 31st of January again. So hopefully we're not in the realm of another shutdown. So any parting words you want to leave our guests with, either of you? You can tell us who your favorite team is or anything.
I hope everybody enjoys the holidays coming up and looks for an opportunity to talk to a friend of another political persuasion and make friends and realize they're not bad people.
Will you talk politics at the Thanksgiving table at your house?
We can't help it.
I love that.
I think it's good. I think sometimes the problem is that we've stopped being able to have civil discussions, and you're like, don't talk politics with your family. And I'm like, well, if you can't talk with your family, who can you talk about? So,
No, that's exactly right. If you don't talk about religion and politics, what they always say, don't talk about that. Well, that's part of our problem. We've lost the ability to civilly talk about those things. And that's at the heart of who we are as people, what our faith is and what our opinions of policy are. So instead of ignoring that, we should learn how to do it appropriately and respectfully, recognizing that diverse opinions and even oppositional opinions is okay in our system of government. One thing that I'll point out to folks is if you have any questions about this initiative process to repeal Proposition 4, feel free to go to ufrg.org. And then as people are out there gathering signatures, certainly feel free to consider that, and we'd love you to add your signature to it.
Will they be knocking on doors or finding you at Harmon's, or where are they at?
They'll be all over the place. There will be opportunities.
How are we going to remember that acronym, UFRG?
UFRG.
UTONs for Representative Government. UTONs for Representative Government, ufrg.org. But more importantly than even all of this, like you said, we're coming into the Thanksgiving and holiday season. For me, this is the time of year that I recharge my batteries for the next year. And I do it through time with family, through expressions of gratitude, service, being around people that I love and that love me. And I hope that all of your listeners can do the same and reconnect with what matters most.
Find a little love in your life and spread a little cheer and kindness around. I think it would go a long way for a lot of issues. Thank you both for having a civil discussion on what is a difficult issue here in the state of Utah. We will be back again next week.